Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Barrett. I served as the Secretary of your United States Air Force and as an Atlantic Council board member. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this important conversation with General Thomas Bussiere, Commander of the U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command. As Secretary of the Air Force, I had the privilege of working with General Bussiere. His steady hand, strategic vision, and devotion to mission were evident then as they are now in his stewardship of our nation's long-range strike capabilities. We'll return to his impressive biography in a moment, but first, let me thank the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and particularly its Forward Defense Program, for convening this timely session. The Scowcroft Center honors the legacy of General Brent Scowcroft, whose belief in principled leadership, bipartisan cooperation, and strategic foresight remains a North Star of American statecraft. Consistent with that ethos, the Forward Defense Team works to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies that ensure that the United States and its allies and partners retain a military advantage. Through programs like today's, Forward Defense identifies what it will take for the United States to deter, and if necessary, prevail in any future conflict. The 2023 Congressional Strategic Posture Commission issued an ominous warning that today's US-led international order is under threat from the Chinese and Russian authoritarian regimes, which seek to disrupt and displace the current order and create a new version conducive to their authoritarian regimes. The Commission cautioned further that unless the United States adjusts its strategic posture, U.S. vital interests and international stability are at risk. Their assessment underscores the urgency of reinforcing U.S. strategic deterrence. That's why the United States is undertaking the most comprehensive nuclear modernization in more than 4 decades. This includes building the Sentinel ICBM, the B-21 Raider stealth bomber, the Columbia-class submarine, and a complete overhaul of our nuclear command, control, and communications. These are the bedrock of our strategic defense. They are foundational to maintaining a credible deterrent in the face of advancing Chinese, Russian, and North Korean nuclear capabilities and others at the threshold. To navigate this current terrain, America relies on leaders of vision and vigilance. General Tom Bussiere is among the very best. As Commander of Global Strike Command, General Bussiere carries responsibility for day-to-day readiness of 2 legs of our current nuclear triad, the ICBM force and the bomber fleet. Simultaneously, he leads transition to a modernized nuclear force. He provides combat-ready forces for global strike today and ensures that deterrence remains credible, flexible, and resilient for tomorrow. The systems he oversees and the decisions he executes will shape America's deterrent posture for the better part of the 21st century. His distinguished 40-year Air Force career included experience in flying, staff, and command assignments, including as the Deputy Director of Nuclear Homeland Defense and Current Operations at the Joint Staff, as the Inspector General for Global Strike Command, and Deputy Chief of Staff for the multinational force Iraq. General Bussiere has more than 3,400 hours in trainers, fighters, and bombers. He led combat missions both as a fighter pilot and as a bomber pilot. His leadership reflects deep technical mastery, but he is known for his abiding commitment to the dedicated men and women who make deterrence real. Finally, he connects the Air Force base in the community more effectively than any military leader in my experience. Welcome, General Tom Bussiere. And now moderating today's conversation is the highly respected national security correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, Michael Gordon. He covers the Pentagon, the National Security Council, and the State Department. With over 4 decades of experience, Michael has reported on major military conflicts from the field, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Kosovo conflict, the Russian intervention in Chechnya, and the 1991 Persian Gulf War. Now, before I turn it over to Michael, I'd like to remind everyone that this event is public and on the record. We encourage viewers to direct any questions to General Bussiere by visiting askac.org. That's askac.org. Be sure to identify yourself and your affiliation in your question. We'll collect questions throughout the discussion, and to the extent that time allows, Michael will pose your questions to General Bussiere. Also, we encourage viewers to join the conversation on X by following @ACScowcroft and using the hashtag #ForwardDefense. Thank you for joining the Atlantic Council for what I know will be a captivating conversation. General Bussiere and Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Well, thank you. Thank you for introducing the session. I have a few questions here, and I'm sure our viewers will have some too, which I'll intersperse in the course of what I hope will be a dialogue with the general carrying the bulk of the conversation. But I'd like to start off by asking, the Strategic Posture Commission was a seminal document, really, in explaining the future strategic environment, Chinese-Russian threats. And another important document was one that the Biden administration put out toward the end of the administration, the Nuclear Weapons Employment Planning Guidance, which said that not only are these threats, but they also need to be deterred simultaneously, which I think was an important statement. Didn't spell out how, but it spelled out the goal. General, could you explain what you derived from the Strategic Posture Commission report, what you thought was most important, and also the threats? You know, what is your assessment of the threats and how these actors, China, Russia, and even states like North Korea, might be cooperating, and to what degree are they cooperating?
Yeah, Michael, thank you. Thank you for doing this, and thanks to Secretary Barrett for the introduction, and obviously to the Atlantic Council for hosting us. So I'll give you my perspective on the Strategic Posture Commission and kind of how it frames out the world as that bipartisan commission captured in that study, which was as everyone knows, I think that's listening, it was a bipartisan commission that looked at the world. Really from 27 to 35 was the framing mechanism the commission used as predicated by the congressional direction. So if you look at the threat, right, if you look at the world and you look at what we see today and you frame it out from whether it's Russia, China, North Korea, or nuclear aspirational Iran, I have said publicly on many occasions that the world as we see it today is more complicated, more complex, more convoluted, and more dangerous than any time in my 40-year career. And I think the Strategic Posture Commission report did a really good job capturing that. Now, most of the intelligence in that report is in the classified annex and not publicly available. But take it for granted that the report did a very thorough job in identifying the threats that we see across the fabric. And again, it's couched in the framework of the report's timeframe. Now, the way I look at the Strategic Posture Commission report is really, it's a consolidation of the statement of the obvious of our nation, right? So if we look at the threats, we look at the need to recapitalize the strategic triad. And now it's more than just the strategic triad. They look at the strategic posture of the United States, but it looks at the weapon systems, the human dynamics, the support infrastructure required both in the Department of Defense and Department of Energy. And it frames out what they believe our nation needs to do, both in maintaining our current force and modernizing the future force. I guess the rhetorical question back to the audience is, are we going to take heed of that report and take action?
Well, let me ask you a follow-up question on that. The commission talks about the need to fully execute the nuclear modernization program of record that's underway, delivery platforms, warheads. It also says the United States should accelerate the timing of this program when feasible and determining additional requirements. But it seems that perhaps we're moving in the opposite direction. and that we're running into some bumps in the road in executing the modernization program in a timely way. And I'd like you just to start off, you have two of the legs of the triad. What is the latest status of the Sentinel program? What needs to be done to get that back on track? And what are the timelines in that? And how long can the Minuteman III be extended, given as these problems are worked through?
Yeah, Michael, those are fair and are pertinent questions that have been asked a lot in the last year or so.
Mhm.
So let me just kind of back up a little bit as I answer that kind of question. So first of all, the state of our current triad is a byproduct of 40 plus years, right? So after the advent of atomic weapons in the first generation of our triad, we did our first recapitalization in the 80s, and we're doing our second recapitalization in the 2020-2030s. So really, this is the second major recapitalization of the enterprise. I think if we had to do it again, we might look at maybe doing one leg every 10 years versus all three legs at the same time. But our nation deferred the recapitalization to where we are today. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two, I think most folks listening understand that by my count, we're on the 13th straight administration, politically party agnostic, that has studied and directed our nation have a triad. So that is a policy decision that our nation has decided that is in the best interest of our national security consistently for many, many decades. So as we look at the transition from Minuteman III to the Sentinel program, as we look at the transition from the B1/B2 to the B-21 and the associated weapons and weapon system support infrastructure, that program of record that we look at right now in 2025 is based on a 2010 threat. So every program of record we have right now was started back in the 2010 roughly timeframe. So one of the points the Strategic Posture Commission made is the threats that we see today in 2025 or in the report's framing of 27 to 35 is different than the original threats that we observed and saw in the 2010 timeframe. So that was one of the main points of the Strategic Posture Commission, is that the threats we see today and in the future are different than we originally had when the programs were developed. So their point of looking at maintaining the current viability of the current fleet while we transition to the B-21 and the Sentinel and the associated support infrastructure is a very important point that I don't want to get lost in the conversation. Going back to your specific point on the Sentinel weapon system, I think most listeners are aware that last year the department declared, in accordance with the Nunn-McCurdy law, a breach of the program. To clarify where that program is right now, the program is still ongoing. The preponderance of the breach was the construction costs associated with the launch facilities and the command and control facilities in that segment of the weapon system. And that part of the Nunn-McCurdy restructuring program is ongoing right now. And of course, I think most folks are aware we're required to go back and reestablish Milestone B with the OSD ANS director. But many aspects of the program are ongoing and going well. There will be a delay as we do that, but I'm encouraged by the activities that are going on right now between industry, our ops maintenance professionals, and the acquisition professionals. So we are seeing some great opportunities in the restructure of the program as a result of the Nunn-McCurdy process.
Well, what can you say about how long this delay might be, and what is the how much longer, in your judgment, can the Minuteman III be extended? Officials used to say that it can't be extended very much, but now it looks like it will have to be extended to a certain degree just to accommodate the turbulence in the Sentinel schedule.
Yeah, so what we're advertising right now is the reestablishment of Milestone being roughly 18 to 24 months is the number the department's used. And of course, we've burned into some of that already since the declaration to Congress last July. So one of the big differences between the pre-Nunn-McCurdy and the post-Nunn-McCurdy is the restructuring of the program allowed for the introduction of new launch facilities versus reusing the previous launch facilities. So the way the program was structured in the post-McCurdy provides some opportunity that the department is exploring, and there's some very encouraging activity going on right now. So the delay may not be as much, depending on how the restructuring goes with the redesign of our launch facilities.
So let me ask you a little bit about, please, on the bomber leg. There've been some challenges with the B-52J upgrade. What's going on with that, and what's the current status of that program? Because that's an important projected capability.
So are you referencing the radar?
The radar and perhaps the new engines. Yeah, the radar.
Yeah, so the B-52H to J model upgrades is a conversion of the current motors, the TF-33s, to the Rolls-Royce. So new motors, new radar, and new avionics, and some comm gear. I think what your listeners are probably interested in is it's a very complex modification between the H and the J, all at the same time. We say it's an analog to digital conversion. What happened, not unlike other acquisition programs, the modification schedule, cost, and productions of the radar were different than originally designed when the program started years ago. So that the Air Force did declare that there's going to be a potential non-McCurdy on the radar, but not a critical, significant. But the program acquisition professionals and the command has worked very hard to keep the program costs under control so that program for the radar modernization can continue.
So if the current,
if I can go back just for a second,
please,
on the Minuteman III, I never answered your question on the Minuteman. So the Sentinel program is progressing well post non-McCurdy. We have an obligation to keep the Minuteman III viable until we get the Sentinel weapon system there. So there's an operational requirement to transition to Sentinel, and then there's a vendor spare part sustainment challenge with the Sentinel program. There's various different aspects of the Minuteman III and the Sentinel transition program. This July will be 55 years since we first fielded the Minuteman III weapon system in North Dakota. So maintaining the viability of that weapon system is a national imperative until we field the Sentinel. We have to do it.
If the program of record is based on a 2010 threat, and the threat is increased substantially since then, particularly on the Chinese side, but the Russians are also fielding new capabilities, and the fate of New START, it's winding down that particular agreement. Is your view that the United States needs a larger strategic nuclear arsenal, and where does the B-21 fit into your thinking? I mean, that's a success story, I think, as you see it, and not a troubled program, and it has an inventory objective of 100, and I think you've been quoted in the past as saying potentially you could go up to substantially more than that, perhaps as much as 145. Do we need more weapons, and should we be at least considering expanding the fleet of B-21s, both because of the target set and also to compensate for any delays in some of these other programs?
Yeah, so the force mix, I think that's one of the major aspects of the Strategic Posture Commission is what is the proper force mix or force balance between the air leg, the sea leg, and the land leg of the triad. But also from a B-21 perspective, there's a conventional and a nuclear aspect, dual docked weapon system. Again, it's not lost on me that Air Force Global Strike Command is the only command in the free world that has ICBMs and bombers. None of our allies and partners have ICBMs or bombers. So that's an aspect of this small command that provides that capability and capacity for not only the Department of Defense in the United States, but our allies and partners. So is 100 B-21s and 75 B-52Js the right force mix for our nation and our support of our allies and partners in the future. So if we step back from that basic question and we look at it not only from a nuclear deterrence perspective on the air leg, but we look at it from a conventional long-range global strike perspective, there's a body of evidence to say that it's worthy of exploring whether or not the United States Air Force has the right force mix between long-range strike and shorter tactical combat aircraft. The 145 number is a number that came around the 2018-19 timeframe, where the chief of staff at the time said that the right number of bombers is roughly 220, which would equate to 75 B-52J models, and then the 145 B-21s. Again, but that's predicated on an earlier threat. So if we look at the threats today, we look at the viability of the B-21 to deter both conventional and non-conventional conflict. And then if conflict does arise, the capabilities of that platform to hold at risk what we're directed to hold at risk. We're starting to see a number of combatant commanders and a number of members of the department as well as Congress asking the question, is 100 enough?
Mm-hmm. Are you suggesting 145 might not be enough?
I think we need to explore it. I think we need to look at what the right number is for our nation. And the good news is I think we have time to make that decision. But that's a pertinent question that's been asked for several years now, and it's also highlighted in the Strategic Posture Commission that we should evaluate it.
So one of the points the Strategic Posture Commission made was that if there were delays in strategic modernization and there were and the threats kept advancing, a way to bridge the gap might be to upload or to add weapons to existing systems. And the options they identified as uploading warheads on existing Miniman missiles, which is a single warhead missile these days, maybe converting B-52s from a conventional role to more of them to a nuclear role. You could do things with the Ohio-class submarines and put more missiles in there. Are you actively looking and exercising these options and experimenting with them, doing the kind of planning that would be necessary if the U.S. had to implement this in the years ahead?
So, Michael, to your previous point about New START, so as everyone probably is tracking, in February of 26, New START will expire, and right now there is no follow-on arms control. So right now we are encumbered by the restrictions and limits within the New START treaty from the U.S. Perspective. Post New START, there may be a direction to provide additional capacity both on the land leg and on the bomber leg if directed. We are ready and prepared to execute whatever directed from the department.
So I understand the limits imposed by arms control. So you can't actually deploy these additional any uploaded capabilities, but you certainly can be prepared to deploy them. And there have been ICBM tests with 3 warheads. So are you saying you're developing these options so you can move ahead if they're necessary next year?
We have the capability and capacity to do it when directed.
Is there a trade-off between uploading to some of these systems and perhaps you creating a little more disruption in strategic modernization? Is there, how would you assess these options in terms of the pros and cons, just in terms of strategic modernization program and other capabilities? Presumably, if you're going to upload on a Minuteman, you have to take it out of service for a period of time. If you're going to make more B-52s nuclear capable, that's fewer conventional. What are the pros and cons of these kind of options?
So our folks have a very deliberate plan for how we're going to synchronize either an upload to our Minuteman III weapon system, and then a very deliberate plan of how we're going to deliver the launch facilities and the control centers to the Sentinel program for upgrading. So in fact, just yesterday, I looked at a plan for 2 of our missile wings on that transition of how we're going to propose the transition from Minuteman III to Sentinel. and that accounts for our operational requirements for Stratcom and the nation. So we have it's a very delicate plan, but we have a very delicate plan to maintain our minimum operational requirements for Stratcom and the nation for our land leg, and still provide the capability and capacity to incrementally upgrade the Minuteman III system to the Sentinel weapon system. So we have a plan for both, Michael, both for MIRVing as well as the transition from Minuteman III. But we like whether it's the Minuteman III, the Sentinel, or the B1, B2, the B21, one unique aspect is we have to maintain full operational capability, to your point, for Stratcom and the nation while we do that. That is a task that if we were just doing it with one leg of the triad would be challenging. We're doing it all at the same time across all facets of our two legs, and that's going to take an effort and a lift from everybody.
I'd like to pivot a little bit out of the nuclear sphere and just ask you, what do you think the implications are of the audacious Ukrainian operation on Sunday to attack the Russia's bomber fleet with drones? What's the significance of the damage that was done to the Russian bomber fleet? How many were damaged? And what are the implications for the United States? Do you have any counter UAS capability that would defend your bases, or do you have sufficient capability? What are the implications for your forces?
Well, so we have been paying attention to counter UAS capabilities in Global Strike Command and Department of the Air Force for many years. Obviously, the attack on the Russian bomber bases, I don't want to say was a novel surprise, because that capability and that threat's been evident. We've seen it across the fabric in different classes of UASs for many years. The technology is available to counter that threat in the United States, whether it's coordinating with Northcom or Stratcom. I would say I look at that threat probably at least once a month, and we are working on upgrading our capabilities and capacities every day. The department's focused on it. The Air Force is focused on it. And I would gather that based on what we've witnessed in the last few days, the department's going to be a little more aggressive in probably addressing those types of threats in the continental United States. But it's been on our minds for decades.
Well, is there a new counter drone defense system at hand or nearly at hand that you would like to deploy, or does this suggest that you need to put more of your aircraft in hardened shelters, or do you think that the situation in the United States is just different than in Russia, and the likelihood of this kind of threat materializing is less? What concrete steps do you think might need to be taken?
Well, so we are always exploring, even well before this event ever happened, advancing the technology. So the good news is our industry partners have developed capability and capacity and technologies to do counter UAS in various different domains. So not only detection and ID, but defeat mechanisms, both non-kinetic and kinetic. So the capabilities exist. There are some nuances in the department, in the government, where different federal departments have to work together from a continental United States perspective to make sure we can work out. And that's where you'll hear the term, the whole government approach to approaching that threat. We have capability and capacities today. We don't obviously advertise them and talk about them freely, both to protect our fixed bases as well as our mobile operations. And we literally, I probably meet with industry partners every month or every other month on new technologies to approach these threats. Again, not a new threat. I would say, to your point, it's probably a little bit different in the continental United States, but we kind of have a basic premise in the department that we don't respect a threat. So the threat is real. We're not going to respect it. We're going to develop capability and capacities and operational techniques to defeat that. And it's been a priority in the department, like I said, for years.
I'd like to ask you a bit about some conventional missions that you're executing, both real world missions and and your bomber task forces. There was a notable B-2 deployment to Diego Garcia, which they were there for a while. What was the purpose of that deployment? What did they do there, and what did you learn from that deployment in terms of keeping their aircraft in that kind of environment for a period of time?
So if you'll allow me, Michael, I'll kind of back away from just that discrete question for a second, then I'll drill down on that one deployment. So in the last 18 months, we've seen the demand signal for bombers, all three, B-1, B-2, and B-52, the unyielding demand signal for long-range conventional global strike. So that has manifested itself in not only what we categorize as bomber task force missions, where we go out for either a month or a week or do CONUS to CONUS missions where we leave the United States, go engage with an ally or partner and exercise and come back on the same sortie. In 2024, we did 33 of those bomber task force missions. Training and integrating, 10 in the Indo-Pacific region, 10 in the European theater, 6 to the Central Command AOR, and then Southcom, Northcom, as well as integrating with our allies and partners across the fabric of the globe. Our allies and partners love integrating with our bombers. Our allies and partners love having a bomber showing the American flag over their country or integrating with their air forces or exercising with their ground forces. In the last 18 months, we've had seven no-notice activations of what we call our immediate response force, where we were tasked, no notice, to generate our bombers and either send them somewhere for, 5 of them were for combat, 2 of them were for integration and messaging. And down to your specific point on the B-2s, again, the combatant commander wanted that capability and capacity in theater, and we generated those bombers and push them out in theater to do combat for CENTCOM. We did that 5 times in the last 18 months. B-1s, B-2s, and B-52s have all flown, been activated in short notice and done combat missions around the globe. The demand signal is unyielding because of the capability and capacity of long-range strike, payload in range. And again, I'm a little bit biased. Bombers just send a different message around the world.
Now, those B-2s engaged in combat, did they not?
Yes, they did.
What did they do in Yemen against the Houthi targets?
I'll defer to CENTCOM on what our bombers did in his AOR, but make no mistake about it, they were flying combat missions in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Can you sketch out, since we're talking about bombers, what you think the bomber fleet should look like in the future after the B-21s become operational, what the breakdown will be of the different types of bombers, B-21, B-52, and B-1s, which are going to be phased out first? What is going to be the breakdown of this U.S. bomber fleet and at what, over time?
So right now we have 140 bombers, B-1, B-2, and B-52, and we're going to transition over time to 100 B-21s and 75 B-52J models. So that's right now, that's the program of record. If the Air Force and the nation decides we need more B-21s, then that'll grow to a higher number. The transition will be Ellsworth, Whiteman, and Dyess are the 3 main operating bases for the B-21. And then Minot Air Force Base and Barksdale Air Force Base will remain our B-52J model bases. If the Air Force decides to extend the number of B-21s, we'll explore whether we plus up the main operating bases that we currently have on the map, or if we have to expand that to other bases. But the transition over time will be to replace the B-1 first. Once the B-1 at Ellsworth is replaced by the B-21, they'll take up the missions required for the B-2, and then we'll transition the B-2, and then the last base will be Dyess. There's a lot of talk in the department. You'll hear a lot of talk about whether or not we need to dovetail the B1 and B2 into the B21. So the Air Force and the department's looking at the exquisite timing of that to make sure our capacity for conventional long-range strike is sufficient for what the nation needs. And so that level of detailed analysis is done, and we're providing that to the senior leadership in the department.
So apropos this future bomber fleet, the current reconciliation bill before Congress includes some substantial funding for more production capacity for the B-21. How many B-21s can be built per year with the production line as it is now? And how many would you like to see, or at least as a capacity, if the decision is yet to be made?
So if the reconciliation bill provides additional dollars for the B-21, that the intent is to address what's called the ramp rate. So the ability to ramp up the production of the B-21 to get more bombers on the ramp quicker. The exact details of that I can't go into on this platform, but rest assured, if Congress gives us the additional money, then it'll be a decision from the Department of Defense and the Department of the Air Force with the Secretary's direction to get the contractor to ramp up that number. It's been a request of the department to us for a while now, is what's it going to take and what's it going to cost to ramp up the B-21 production to get a higher number of aircraft on the ramp sooner.
So I have a few audience questions that I'd like to, on this theme on bombers, I'd like to work into the conversation. But one question is that from Jonathan Rosenstein of the Atlantic Council, is that you obviously are touting the capabilities of the B-21, and in the popular mind, a lot of people think of drones and other. It's often said that drones have changed the character of war. People make that observation all the time, looking at the Ukraine conflict, which may be a bit of an anomaly. But what would you, like someone like Elon Musk has said that the manned aircraft era should be obsolete. Why is a bomber such an important weapon system in future war, as you see it, giving the advantages in autonomous systems and drones and artificial intelligence and the like? What makes the bomber so essential?
So the essence of long range strike is range and payload. I won't predict that there won't be a day in the future where human beings won't have to be involved in long range strike. I personally don't think I'll see that in my lifetime. I mean, the technology I don't think is at that level yet. And that's just from a practical standpoint. And then there's the more operational relevant piece, is that are we going to have, we're definitely probably not ever going to have, at least in my mind, a nuclear bomber that is autonomous, and that is a human decision, and the one of the attributes of the air leg is flexible and recallable. So I think there's a conventional piece for it, and then there's a dual dock piece to it when it comes to autonomous or artificial intelligence. Long range strike and combat and long range strike platforms, I think, is going to be a tenet of the Air Force for many, many decades. There's value in autonomous vehicles. There's value in uncrewed aircraft. But I don't think it's one at the expense of the other. I think they're complementary in different mission spaces. But I don't think in the near future I'm going to see a uncrewed B-21 doing autonomous operations with AI, but maybe someday.
An audience member, Edward Brady, has an interesting question on this point. I'm just going to read out most of it. He said, bombers will be critical for any war in the Pacific. But in both roles, they're, they feature in war games, nuclear focused games, look at the positioning of bombers, and other dual capable aircraft is a deterrent signal, but they're also used in a conventional role. Do you have any thoughts on the possible disconnect between the heavy use of bombers by conventional planners and the perception that flying bombers represent a major deterrent signal by nuclear planners?
I think that discussion has been out there for a while. Like, a dual capable bomber is a very powerful U.S. signal across the globe, and I'd offer to you that's one of the reasons why the Bomber Task Force missions are under high demand. It's not because those dual dock bombers are flying around with nuclear weapons. It's because the capability, capacity, and the deterrence factor of those platforms sends a very clear message to any potential adversary, and it sends a very clear message to our allies and partners on the capability and capacity we can provide. They're complementary, right? So that's the beauty of long range strike. They're complementary. And the only thing I'll add to that, Michael, is the U.S. has never been to war with a nuclear armed adversary by design. The whole theory of deterrence and the value of peace through strength is the underpinning of what our command provides the nation. Deterrence is very specific, and if deterrence fails, that's the capability and capacity that our command provides to the Air Force, the department, and the nation.
I have a very specific weapon system question from John Tierpak of Air and Space Forces magazine. The weapon that keeps the B-52 in the strategic nuclear game is the long-range standoff weapon. If the B-52 goes away, do we need the LRSO? And how is that program going?
LRSO program is going well. We will always have a carriage capacity to carry the LRSO. Right now, it is the B-52, but we'll have the capability of carrying that weapon on other platforms too. My guess is when the B-52J model is retired, there's going to be another long-range strike platform to do standoff weapons carriage.
Can I ask you, return to what our adversaries are doing? And you have the Bomber Task Force, but the Russians and the Chinese have their own operations, and sometimes they work together. There was a notable incident in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, I remember writing about the other year, where they did work in concert and they were integrated to some degree. What is the significance of this sort of training, and at least in exercises, joint operations between the Chinese and Russian, I think, bomber forces? And is it just for show, or is it an operational capability? Is it political signal, or is it something more than that?
I think it's a little bit of everything you just mentioned, Michael. I mean, if you compare and contrast the United States of America and our allies and partners around the globe, if you just use the Bomber Task Forces as an example, and you look at our integration across the globe in just one 12-month period, I think there's some of that in what we're seeing with the bomber missions that Russia and China did together. So flying in the same airspace is a different dynamic than the integration of training, the integration of capabilities, the exercising, the exchanges, the depth of relationships we have with our multitude of allies and partners is a different dynamic. In some respects, I think, if you listed off the allies and partners of Russia and China versus the US, you might have a different list. And some of it's just emulating what they see, in my opinion, what they see the US do so successfully with our allies and partners.
Well, it's known that in the kind of conventional area, China has really enabled the Russian defense industry and provided a lot of critical components that's enabled them to stay more effectively involved in the war in Ukraine. Do you see that kind of cooperation in the strategic nuclear sphere, or is that beyond the pale for those two powers at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much in-depth cooperation they've done in that realm. But we've seen different levels of integration and cooperation across different domains. I'm not sure that level of integration in the nuclear sphere.
There's another power we haven't mentioned, but it's one of concern. It's, I think, certainly noted in the Strategic Posture Commission report, is North Korea, because their nuclear arsenal is growing. And there was a recent public study by the United States and its allies on sanctions invasion on North Korea, of which Russia is the principal culprit, probably followed by China. But while North Korea has given a lot of military assistance to Russia in terms of ballistic missiles and personnel, it stated in that report that there's been cooperation coming the other way from Russia to Pyongyang, and that some of it included providing sort of missile tracking data to North Korea from Russia to help North Korea refine or improve the guidance of its weapon systems. Have you seen that sort of thing? And do you have any thoughts about that?
Not specific to that capability, but it's not surprising to see those cross pollination of technologies. Again, if you step back from it and you look at who are the allies and partners of those nations, they kind of have to work within that sphere to get any type of capability and capacity because of the restrictions the international community has put on those nations and those technologies. It's not surprising to see that.
So, as I mentioned at the start, the Biden administration's nuclear weapons planning guidance said publicly the United States needs to simultaneously deter Russia, China, and North Korea. It didn't say we need to have an equivalent strategic weapon, a nuclear arsenal to the three states, but we need to deter them all. And it said that this could be done through, I mean, the assumption is through nuclear forces, more advanced conventional forces, and other kind of modalities. As we enter this very complex environment where there are no arms control discussions with Russia underway now for what to do after New START expires in February 2026. China's not involved in any nuclear discussions with the United States or anybody. It's resisted that and sort of signaled it's not going to do that until it completes its modernization down the road. How do you think about deterrence in this sort of three-way configuration?
No, it's a pretty complex question. So we have decades and decades of experience of stability mechanisms with Russia, whether it's arms control treaties or strategic stability talks or mechanisms to prevent miscalculations. Decades of experience with that. We have zero experience having a multipolar world with multiple nuclear powers. And how do you negotiate, mano a mano or mano a many with a multilateral arms control treaty? We've never done that before. And how do you balance that negotiation to make sure it's a fair and equitable and verifiable arms control regimen? And couple that with strategic stability mechanisms to make sure there's no miscalculations. The world's never done that before. And so in short order, in February 26th, we're going to have a world where we have a multipolar world with nuclear powers. And we have to develop not only the mechanisms, the control mechanisms, but the theories behind that, and have a verifiable regimen where we can have more stability. That is a huge challenge that I think everybody needs to be part of. Back in the day, there were think tanks, academic institutions, department experts that all worked hand in glove to make sure we had a very verifiable control mechanism. And I would offer to you, we need to do the same.
We, we've been talking primarily about strategic nuclear posture, but could you address sort of the theater posture that might be needed? And you can imagine that if there was a war in the Pacific, it's, over Taiwan or something with China, it would arise in the Western Pacific and might even stay confined there. I mean, if it's the case that President Putin was seriously considering tactical nuclear weapons a few years back, that would have been in the European theater, and it would have had to been deterred accordingly. What does the U.S. need to improve deterrence in these theaters? Central strategic systems might not be the answer.
Yeah, so I think the Congress and the department's looking at that, right? So what's the right mix of deterrence force posture for both conventional and nuclear capabilities to deter conflict, right? So that's the whole concept of peace through strength, is you present a very powerful military force to deter conflict. And if deterrence fails, then you have the capability and capacity to achieve U.S. objectives if directed. And there are many examples in the Strategic Posture Commission, as well as in record of congressional interest over the last few years on different capabilities within the triad. Both, so strategic and tactical are arms control terms. I don't actually use those because every nuclear weapon is strategic. But there are different capabilities that historically we've used terms of strategic or tactical. Really, I use treaty accountable or non-treaty accountable nuclear weapons, and that applies to both U.S. as well as any potential other nation. There's different capabilities within the arsenals of nations when it comes to nuclear weapons, and those capabilities deter different actors, right? So that's kind of the way I approach it. The nation and the Department of Defense is looking at what's the proper force mix to make sure we deter conflict both regionally and then from a more traditional, we would say, strategic perspective. And both the Navy and the Air Force has taken action on that.
One audience member, Tom Mancinelli, asks a very particular question. He said he notes that President Trump has signed executive orders to support nuclear energy in the United States, and which encourages DoD to use advanced nuclear energy technology. Is there any consideration of having the Air Force or DoD use nuclear technology, micro reactors, or things of that sort to power your ICBM silos or missile launch control centers, or is that nothing that's on the radar now?
So not specific to Air Force Global Strike Command. There are use cases in the Department of Defense looking at micro reactors for power. Again, I'm not completely up to speed on. I was exploring it when I was in Alaskan commander up in the Alaskan AOR, where there's some value in that capability in that region of the nation. I don't have up-to-date information on where that might is, but the Department of Defense was exploring that capability and capacity for different regions. I just don't have the update for 2025 on that, Michael.
If you look at the nuclear environment, what are the nuclear risks you think are most worrisome or plausible or likely, even if they're not highly likely, at least possible? They may not be ones that involve the United States or anything like an exchange of strategic forces. Is it the South Asia? Is it the Ukraine environment? Where do you think the nuclear threat, or at least the threat that a nuclear weapon could be used, is most manifest or greater concern to you as you look across the globe?
Well, any use is a threat, whether it's regional or global. So I think most military professionals would say miscalculation. Saber rattling that we've observed in the last few years in the European theater by Russia, and any potential third nation conflict that might result in either an accident or an incident when it comes to a nuclear weapon. You can't necessarily predict every incident or accident, but you can be prepared for any incident or accident. And that's really the essence of what we provide for the department is always ready to respond if directed.
One concern that a lot of people have these days is that there could be additional nuclear powers might materialize in the years ahead, and to try to avert that, in the case of South Korea, the Biden administration did a lot with extended deterrence to try to reassure Seoul and dissuade them from thinking about on a nuclear path. Are there steps that Global Strike is taking to strengthen extended deterrence and dissuade partners and across the globe from thinking about having their own nuclear capability? What are you doing in that area? And is there more you're thinking of doing? And what more is needed to do that?
So from an Air Force Global Strike Command perspective, we provide really venues for either the State Department or the Department of Defense to bring allies and partners where we can explain our capabilities, explain our capacities, and provide a firsthand account for what we provide in an extended deterrence to allies and partners, either formally or informally, through treaties and alliances. So for our Air Force Global Strike Command demand signal is very, very finite, very distinct based on our responsibilities for the department and U.S. STRATCOM and the Department of Defense. Aside from that, I mean, my personal professional opinion is, the balance of stability on the globe when it comes to this type of realm is a balance of a credible, capable force that deters and executes U.S. national security objectives. And that's really the essence of what Air Force Global Strike Command does for 2/3 of our nation's triad. But then from a practitioner's perspective, I think there's value in having a strong, verifiable arms control regimen, that balancing between that. And then that helps with your question on non-proliferation, right? So if you have a balance between a strong, credible, capable force that provides an extended deterrence umbrella to allies and partners, that prevents the proliferation concern. And then strategic stability is bounded by a verifiable strategic stability mechanism, usually manifested in an arms control regimen.
Is there a role for non-nuclear systems in deterring nuclear attack? And positing that, looking over the different options in the previous administration, given the adversary forces that are growing, he said, well, the U.S. response doesn't necessarily be solely nuclear. There could be non-nuclear capabilities, but can a non-nuclear hypersonic missile or other non-nuclear systems help shore up nuclear deterrence against our adversaries?
I think there's some capability and capacity to do that, Michael. So deterrence is historically associated with the nuclear triad, right? But we all know that deterrence, there's conventional deterrence, there's deterrence in all the domains, and it's a byproduct of capability and capacity and convincing a potential adversary leader that their cost benefit analysis for attack or action in a domain. Traditionally deterrence is associated with the nuclear domain, but we all know that it applies to every domain. And the cross deterrence really between those domains, whether it's space, cyber, aerial, terrestrial, maritime, or nuclear, all of those domains are intertwined. And really, what's the proper mechanism to convince an adversary leader that today's not the day you want to do X, Y, or Z? And that decision calculus of deterrence between those domains is absolutely intertwined. Now, historically, the big deterrence force is the nuclear force, right? It underpins everything in the department. But there are, if you can deter a nefarious actor with a conventional capability or a non-kinetic capability, then absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive, right? And that's the professionalism that the department has, and that's the professionalism that the members in all our services do, is how do you properly and minimally deter, right? That balance is not binary. And when more capabilities and more domain spaces explored, they all intertwine. And I think that was kind of the concept, that was being developed. Is it's not linear. They crosswalk those different domains, and deterrence is in the mind of a potential adversary, right? You're trying to convince the decision maker on their cost benefit analysis. But again, my opinion is that the underpinning of all foundational deterrence is the strategic triad.
Okay. Well, on that note, thank you for your time, for talking to me and to this audience here, and thank the audience members who sent in questions. I tried to read out as many as I could, and we've hit our hour. So I thank you for the discussion, and hope and good luck in your continued career.
Absolutely, Michael. Thanks for doing this, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for hosting it.